everybody. I figured I better get this stream underway. I am eating, so I'm going to turn off my camera for a minute here. But while we were gone, what I was able to do is I got all, and there's a lot, of this foliage in here. And now it's all highlighted, ready to paint, and we can get started. I basically just did that so you didn't have to sit there and watch me drag stuff back and forth if you ever come and watch this stuff. So today we'll probably get a lot of this area here painted, and then we'll be moving over there and then over to that one. All right, here we go.
Rubber bush, and hold shift, click, select all of those as well. So now we are ready to paint. But before we paint, something important. If I keep this paint density at 1.0, it's going to be so dense it might even crash my computer. I don't want to do that. And the reason it'll be so dense is because it's a 1.0 paint density for every single one of these assets. And we just selected something like 50 to 100 assets. So really it's a density of about 100. And just for the sake of the demonstration here, I'm going to lower it to about 0.1. But this too is also way too high, because really we have about 100 assets. That's a paint density of 10. But I just want to show you what kind of effect this has on FPS. So we got about 2,000 assets of each times 100 assets. It's about 200,000 assets. Let's go back to select mode, play, try it out. All right, so we're looking at 40 FPS, dipping down into the 30s, dipping down. You know, I expected it to be worse, to be honest. But that's still pretty bad, right? Because keep in mind, we're still missing 2 out of our 4 quadrants we haven't painted. We don't have any spells or effects. There's a whole lot of stuff we still got to add into our game, and our FPS has to be a lot higher than this. So, how can we increase our FPS? The first thing I'll mention is that I don't actually like the look of the scene as it is, because the player can kind of see over the trees, over the foliage here. And so to start, I'm actually going to increase the size of these. And this is kind of an obvious trick, but it's also a really good one for increasing your density without increasing the total number of assets. Simply making the assets larger. So let's come back out, and let's go into foliage. And I'm just going to go ahead and erase all this. I'll change our brush size to something larger so it's easier to erase. Alright, so now we can select all of our assets here. And let's up our scale quite a bit. So let's up it something like 1.5 to 2.0. And I'll come down here as well.
How do I height or on scale X? I see. So shouldn't it be just, oh, it's uniform. Okay. And then we go 1.5 to 2.0. We're making these a little bit larger than they were.
Well, and I'll do the same for these down here, 1.5 to 2.0. We're keeping them uniform. Now go back over to paint mode, and because we up the size of these, we got to decrease the density. And because we up the size by 100%, it's actually more than that because it's in 2 directions. It's the X and the Y. And so we could decrease the density quite a bit. I would say if we go down to something like 0.02, that's going to be roughly equivalent. So let's give this a go. All right, so look at our FPS now. So we're already above the 30s that we were before. So now we're up to about 45. If I look at our character here, our foliage is still really dense, right? Like I can barely see through things. And I can see my character just barely. But in some ways, I think this could even be less dense, but I like it. It's a good start. And the foliage is high enough that I can't really see that well through the jungle. But I'm just going to decrease our density down to about 0.015. So let me go ahead and erase all this, and we'll paint one more time. Because I think it could still be a little bit less dense and still have the effect I'm looking for. We're just at about 50. Goes up to 55, comes down to about 48. But I like that density. I can see my character quite a bit, but it's still very dense. Yeah, in general, we're looking pretty good. But really, this FPS is still a problem, right? Because if we're already at 50 FPS and we still haven't painted 2 quadrants of our garden, we don't have any special effects, we don't have any other characters in the scene whatsoever, that's not sustainable. So we got to get this up considerably higher. So where do we start? So the very first thing that we're going to do that focuses entirely on improving performance for our foliage is something called cull distance. And I think the best way to show you this is via our biggest asset here, so these really tall areca palms. And so if you come into the content drawer and if you go into our areca palm folder under water quadrant main palette, and I'm going to go into the foliage assets there, and it's really this really tall one that we're talking about. So there's a setting in here called cull distance. Start. So the very first thing that we're going to do that focuses entirely on improving performance for our foliage is something called cull distance. And I think the best way to show you this is via our biggest asset here, so these really tall areca palms. And so if you come into the content drawer, and if you go into our areca palm folder under water quadrant main palette, and I'm going to go into the foliage assets there, and it's really this really tall one that we're talking about. So there's a setting in here called cull distance, the minimum and the maximum. And what this is the minimum distance that our asset begins to disappear, basically not be rendered by our scene, and then the maximum distance that it disappears. So culling basically means that. It means that particular asset is no longer rendered by the game. And that's the distance from the camera when that gets set. So let me just give you a quick example of really bad cull distance. So if I set this to something like 2000, and then I hit play, so I can see our palms just fine, and then when I back up, oh, it just disappeared. And so one common mistake with cull distances is setting them too short. But also, you can have the opposite problem, which is you set the cull distance too long, because the cull distance should vary considerably depending on the type of foliage asset they are talking about. So if it's a foliage asset that's really tall, like that areca palm, it's going to be seen from very far away. You want to set that cull distance to really high, if at all, because it could be seen from all the way across the map. Whereas if it's something that's really short, that asset's not going to be seen that far. But the other important factor in setting the cull distance is really how dense is the area in which that foliage is placed. Because in our jungle in this case, I can't even see more than, let's say, 5 meters in front of me, especially if I'm in the interior. And this is exactly why we have separate foliage types for our water edge. Because for those foliage types, I'm going to set them to either not cull at all or cull at a really far distance away, like something like 20,000, which would be equivalent to 200 meters. Probably the only asset here that I don't want to set a cull distance for, simply because it's so tall, it kind of sticks up above the rest of our jungle. So I can...
Let's see, I want to check now, because now I am really interesting. Okay, it matters what height we do this at. So if I'm sitting down here, what's the tallest? It's this guy, right? Well, I guess I'm probably a little taller than that. So yeah, this guy stands out. So let's see if I can figure out which one that is. Yeah, so it's one of these. I think it's this one. This one looks the tallest. So this one I don't want to cull. Everything else I want to cull eventually.
Set that back to 0 to never cull. And that's okay if you've got 1 or 2 assets that are set to never cull like that. That's totally fine when it's important. The important thing is that the vast majority of our assets are culled at a certain point so that the performance impact doesn't happen across the map. So for the rest of these areca palms, because they're kind of taller assets, I'm going to set that distance to be quite far. And usually I give the minimum and maximum a little bit of difference, so like 8,000 to 10,000.
So basically another boring thing I have to do. I gotta go into each one of these and choose their cull distance, so it's probably gonna take me a little while. Well, I guess I'm done eating, so let's do some story time or something. I don't know. What do I do? How would I entertain an audience if I had one while doing this? It's kind of like a Bob Ross type of thing, right? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into each of these things here, and we're gonna find where they have the cull distance, and you can get that by just typing into this search box. And then he's setting numbers. It sounds like for something a little bit bigger, he would do 8,000 to 10,000. But like, I'll bet you for something this big, 4,000 to 5,000. That's a good distance.
And what that does is it kind of gradually fades out that asset.
Okay, so we're gonna save. Okay. But just for every foliage.
Over that distance. And then for something that's much smaller, like this arrowhead plant here, if I go into those foliage assets, because those only come up to maybe waist level, chest level at best, really I don't need to set that any higher than say like 3,000. Now this could vary depending on the density of your foliage. It's one of the upsides to having a really dense foliage jungle like I have in my scene, because we don't have to set those cold distances to be very high. But usually it's still less of a performance hit to actually thin out your foliage if you have that option in your scene. It's just for the jungle effect that I'm going for, we need to have very dense foliage. So in those cases, the cold distance becomes especially important. Now this is going to take a lot of time, both for the assets in our water quadrant and also our earth quadrant with our Nordic ground cover here. But it's worth it, and I want you to take a look at the FPS as it stands now. It's about 50 to 55, and we're going to see if we can get that up above 60 with just this one trick. For our Nordic coastal ground cover here, I would set the really tall assets to something like maybe 5,000 to 7,000, but for our short assets like these white flowers here.
Yeah, he wants me to literally go into every single one of these and set their cold distances. Oh, okay. Now we got the next asset, everybody. Cold. So it's Friday night, and I'm at home with the kids and the wife, and probably just gonna watch a show or something as a family. I think we're gonna play Wild Rift. Wild Rift is like League of Legends. League of Legends is, why don't you know what League of Legends is if you're watching this? Okay, so cold distance on this one. I'm kidding. Like, some people don't know what League of Legends is. If you don't know what League of Legends is, it's a video game, and it's a MOBA, right? So that's like an arena 5-on-5 thing, like where you, how would I explain that? You get a champion that levels up, and then you have a bunch of minions that go and fight, and then you come and you like level up and get strong enough to kill your opponent. There's 5 people against you, and then you try to destroy all their towers and get to their base, and then you want to kill their base. That's what a MOBA is, generally speaking, and League of Legends is one of those. It's more complicated than that, but that's the general idea. But also, you could just go Google that, by the way. I feel like some of those are now fading already, huh? Or is that because of the camera? I think that's just the camera, because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't have a cold distance on it. Right? Go and check. Yeah, actually, I don't know. Is that cold distance? Yeah, it's got to be cold distance somehow. Still hate my virtual texture blurring going on. Okay, let's keep doing it. Did I get it for this one? I feel like I did. Yeah, I did. 3 to 4,000. 3 to 4,000. Like, this is... That's the sad part of game design, is this part. Like, this is the part that drains your soul. Right here. This isn't fun. Having to do this over and over again. They need to fix it. Get on it. Needs to be a way to adjust all of this stuff. Their cold distances for this entire folder. And way easier, because that's obviously a big issue with performance, so why would you not... You know what I mean? Like, figure it out. I'm pretty sure there's a way. Alright. I'll stop hating on the people that make this possible. Let's see. What if I just hit shift open? No. That was hoping too much. There's gotta be something, right? No? It's like, what if you could just right click all these, do this, and then say, oh, here's their... Because these are tall plants, right? So we don't want a very high... Or we want a really high cold distance. We're going to do minimum 9,000. Max 10,000. has one. Oh no, it doesn't. Yeah, it's funny because these are things that most players won't ever notice anyways, probably. Like if I'm a little bit off on it. And yet, like if you want a good game, you have to do that because people are like, hey, I noticed this. You weren't supposed to notice that, bro. Like, why did you notice that? I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay, I'm going to do this for another few minutes, and then I'm going to have to finish the rest of this offline, too. I don't want to put you guys through this any more than you want to watch it, so I'm assuming no one's going to be like, oh, man, I really wish I had seen that part where you kept clicking into files and changing the coal distance over and over again for like 45 minutes, probably more than that. Oh, what am I doing? 7,000 and 9,000 on this one? Okay. This one looks small. I'm going to do like... Let's do 5,000 to 6,000 for it. Alright, so there's another folder. Like, I have to do it for every single one of these. This is crazy. I mean, this one's not bad. I'll do this one before I get off. How big is it? They look kind of big. This one does. Alright, we're going to do 8,000 and 9,000 on these ones. Let's just do 75 to 85. Or, yeah, 75 to 85. Enable cold distance. I wonder what that is. That might be easier. I don't know. Alright. This one, same. Like, there's probably a way around this whole thing. I mean, this guy's making something beautiful, but it's all just a test area. I mean, this is for an education, but it's definitely not for making my game. I almost want to skip it all. But I feel like if I skip it, I might miss important information for later down the road with the mechanics. I don't know. It's good for me to develop the skills, and it's not so bad. Like, I might just be being lazy by trying to ditch out on it anyway. And I wouldn't want that. Okay, so cold distance on this. 7,500 to 8,500. Save, close. This one looks like a 65 to 75 or 7 to 8 maybe. Okay, and then cold distance for this one, we'll do 75 to 85. Alright, that's good for tonight. We'll leave it there. We're making progress. It's going to turn into something. We'll get there.